Welcome back. In today's lesson, we're going to be talking about the font class. Now, a font describes the way we want something to be written out. It's a very specific type of writing something. The font class describes the font name, weight, and size. To render these texts in specific fonts, you have to first import the JavaFX.scene.text.font class. So, first we're going to import that. We're going to be importing two new classes today, one for fonts and one for labels, and you'll see why we need a label later on. First we're going to do we're going to be importing the specific font class. That's under scene, javafx.scene.text.font. And then we're going to be importing the label class, which is under the javafx.scene.control.label. Now this will allow us to have labels on our specific object, and you'll see how we'll use these later on. Now a font instance can be created by its constructors or by using static methods, just like with a color. In fact, the font and the color classes are actually very similar. A font class is defined by its name, weight, posture, and size. Times, Courier, Arial are examples of font names. You can obtain a list of available font family names by using the static getFamilies method. This returns a list, and the list is an interface that defines common methods for a list. ArrayList is a concrete implementation of list, for example. So when we say getFamilies, we can say the font.getFamilies, which allows us to get all of the family names, such as Arial, such as Times, or anything like that. You might have also noticed there is a get font names and a get font names with a specific family name. These allow us to get already created families and font names for specific types that we might want to use. For example, if you wanted to get the font names under Times, and the way you do that would be to say get, or a font, since it's a static method, font.get font names, and then we provide the font names family we're looking for, which in this case is Times. So this is how you would get the family names if you wanted to put something into a family, or if you want to figure out what fonts are already under a family. However, we can also talk about how to create our own fonts, more importantly. The way to do this is that there are two constructors. First, you have the basic constructor, which creates a font object for a specific size. Now, it's important, this is very similar. If you know how a word processor works, it's very similar to how that works, where you would create a new font for a specific size. So, you could say, let's say we wanted font1 to be equal to a new font with a specific size. We would say 12. This would create a new font of a 12 size. This is going to be a default font, so it's nothing fancy, it's just going to be a default plain text font. If you want to create the specific full font name, then you would provide that. That's the overloaded method here. Instead of just saying 12, you would say a font name, let's say Times, and then you would provide 12 to provide the size you would like. This creates a new font object for a specific type of font. It's important to note that you can't create your own font types, really. You're going to be working from a very specific set of fonts. However, you can modify these fonts specifically. A good analogy to this would be if you were inside a Word document. The Word document doesn't allow you to create your own custom fonts. You can't define the calligraphy for them, but you can specify a font for a specific series of words, and then you can also specify a size and whether it's bolded or italicized. So Java allows us to do this. The way to do that would be to say you would have to use the methods here because the constructors aren't powerful enough to do this. But you would just say, and I'll have an enter here, you would say, for example, font1 is equal to a new, it would be equal to font dot, since we're calling a static method, font dot, and then you would have your specific method call. You have three specific methods we can use here, or three main methods here. These methods are the font with a specific name and size, which is very similar to the constructor. You have the font specific name, weight, and size, which is similar to the constructor. However, the font weight, and we'll show this, you would say dot font. The font weight is going to be the boldness of the font. For example, you only have two options here actually. You could either have a font weight of bold or you can have a font weight of regular. So let's say we want to create a new font and we want this to be of the Times New Roman. And then we want to have the font weight to be bold. You'll notice you have varieties on bold, but for the most part you're going to be choosing between bold and not bold. So once you have that, you're actually finished and you're creating a new font object for the specific font boldness. In this case, it's going to be a standard bold, not regular, not extra bold, not slightly bold, just bold. And it's important to note that if you want your font to work properly, you have to make sure that you import the appropriate class. That appropriate class is going to be the JavaFX.scene.text.fontWeight. However, we're actually going to overwrite this. We're just going to keep this as the wildcard import, since this is the same root class as the italicizing. So we're just going to keep this, and we'll get to italicizing a little bit later on. With that, you also still have to provide a size, more importantly. So let's say we still want to have a default size of 12. So this creates a new font object, Times New Roman font. It's bold, and it has a size of 12. But let's say we want to create a third font. We want to create font 3, and that's going to be equal to font.font, and we want to have, let's say this time we want it to be of a Arial type, and more importantly, we also want to keep the font weight. We want to make sure we still have a font weight, and let's say we still want to keep it bold, so we'll just say font weight dot bold. However, this time we're actually going to have a font posture. The font posture is what we would call italicization. So you would say font posture dot italic, and you'll see you have a variety of them here. You can either have italic or regular. In this case, we're going to have italic since we want to make sure that it is italicized. So once you've created this, you then still have to specify your font size, and let's say we want the font size to be 12.5 since this can be a double value. So with that, we've now created two new fonts. One is Times New Roman bold 12 size. The other one is Arial bold italicized and 12.5 size. So let's say we actually want to implement this. And let's say the way we want to implement this is using a label. On the circle we have right here, we want to make sure that we have the word JavaFX in the center, and we want that to be of the specific font that we've specified right here. The way to do this is going to be by creating a new label, then setting its font. So we're going to do this very simply actually. We have to make sure that this is after we've created our pane object, since this is going to be included with the pane. So we're going to do this after we set the color to all of the circle objects and everything. However, we're going to make sure we change the set fill because the text is going to be black. So we need to make sure that we change the fill color so that it shows up so that black shows up well on it. Let's say we want to change it to white. That's a very easy color that we know black will show up on. So we're going to say label, and we're going to call this label, is equal to a new label, and then you provide what you want to say in this label. We want to say JavaFX. After that, we now can set our font, and this is where our font, what we've been doing, really comes into play. We say label.setFont. When we set the font, we can either create a new font object right here. However, we've created two font objects up here. Let's say we want to work with font 3. We're going to say font 3 is what we want the font to be equal to. So it's going to say JavaFX in Arial, bold, italicized with a size of 12.5. After that, though, we have to make sure we add this to the pane. Now we can either add this separately. We could say pane1.getChildren.add label. However, you might have noticed this when we were first going over panes. We actually have an add all method. This add all method allows us to add multiple nodes to a specific pane. So in this case, we don't want to just add the circle. We also want to be able to add the label. Now this is going to work perfectly well. Usually we want to make sure we put our most general object on the outside and our more specific objects on the inside. So we would say circle, then label. However, this isn't necessary because the Java virtual machine is intelligent enough that it'll work properly either way. But in our case, By saying add all circle and label, we've cut out an entire line of code because otherwise we would have to have said pane1.getChildren.add label. Instead, by saying circle and then label, we know we're adding both of these things, and it makes our code actually more readable since we can see that we're adding both of these at the same time, and therefore we know very clearly that we've added a label and the circle correctly to the node. Now if we run our program, you'll see that we've created the white circle as we intended, and now we actually have a label, and this label is perfectly designed so that it's of the perfect type. It's going to be Arial, bold, italicized, and you can see that all of these topics, all of these criteria have been filled out, and it's of a small enough font. It's of 12 font because we specified this. If you had used default font, you would have run into far more issues with your label. So this is why we have the font class. It allows us to specify a very specific type of font for a very specific situation when we need to display something on the screen. Now you also have your default fonts. However, in most cases, you can actually create your own font and specify it to your own needs. Hopefully you found this lesson useful. To summarize, in today's lesson, we talked about the font class, the specific constructors, the static method constructors functionally, and we talked about how to implement them on a specific circle. Hopefully you found this lesson useful, and hopefully you're able to leverage the font class in your own programs.